They say in 1935, in a quiet corner of Australia, a mother gave birth to the same child not once, not twice, but 3 times. A tale that sounds impossible, yet every whisper of it refuses to die. Strange beginnings, unsettling questions, and a story that will not let you go once you step inside. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to know. The year was 1935, and the Australian summer stretched long and unforgiving across the landscape. The dust of the outback clung to everything, to boots left by the door, to the window panes of weatherboard houses, to the very air itself that shimmered with heat. In those months, the country was still shaking off the shadows of the Depression, men finding work where they could, women holding together the fragile threads of home. Among those homes, tucked in a modest town where gossip was quick to spread but sympathy slower to arrive, there lived a woman whose story would defy sense, science, and the quiet order of daily life. Her neighbors knew her as a woman of modest means, a mother of resilience, and a figure both respected and whispered about. She was not the type to demand attention, but attention sought her all the same. Her story began, as many stories do, with a birth. The first arrival was heralded in the usual way: pain, struggle, relief, and the fragile cry of a newborn filling the house. The midwife who attended was seasoned and calm, a woman accustomed to the rhythms of life and death in those rural towns. Yet even she sensed that something about this birth would linger in her memory longer than most. The child was small, but not unusually so. A boy, with features that seemed to settle quickly into an expression both knowing and frail. The mother held him against her chest, the warmth of her own skin pressing into his, and for a time everything seemed exactly as it should be. The father, weary from long days of labor, bent low to kiss his wife's forehead, then leaned closer to see the boy, his own pride muted by exhaustion. But life in 1935 carried with it no guarantees, and within days the boy's strength faltered. His cry grew weaker, his breath shallower. Despite every effort from the midwife, from neighbors, from the mother's tireless vigil, the child slipped away before his first month had passed. The grief was unspeakable, though it was borne quietly, as grief often was in that time and place. The baby was buried in a small plot not far from town, marked by a simple wooden cross. The mother returned to her duties, her loss tucked away like a stone in her heart. She was young enough, the neighbors said, to bear another. Time might heal what it could. The rhythm of days resumed, though her nights remained heavy with absence. And then, months later, she became pregnant again. The anticipation carried with it both joy and fear, for every birth held its risks, and memory made the risks seem greater still. She prepared herself as best she could, her body once more reshaping itself, her household adapting to the quiet changes that gestation demands. The day of labor arrived, fierce and unrelenting. The same midwife attended, her hands steady, her voice calm, and when the child emerged, slick with life and full of sound, the mother froze. For the features staring back at her were not merely reminiscent of the first son, they were identical. The curve of the nose, the shape of the eyes, even the delicate turn of the mouth, all of it, down to the smallest detail, was as though the first boy had returned. The midwife felt her hands tremble, though she did not say what she thought. She only nodded and reassured the mother, though the unease in her stomach was sharp as a knife. The father, too, hesitated when he saw the child. He said nothing of it at first, only kissed his wife and muttered something about God's mysterious ways. Yet as days turned to weeks, the uncanny resemblance deepened. It was not merely the likeness of one sibling to another. It was, to all appearances, the same child. This second boy lived longer than the first. He grew past the fragile weeks of infancy, his cry strong, his limbs learning to stretch and curl. The mother, cautious but hopeful, began to believe she might keep him. She sang to him, carried him about the small house, watched as his eyes tracked the light through the window. She loved him fiercely, though part of her love was bound up in fear. But as fate would have it, this child too did not endure. Illness came in the form of fever, and in that time, medicine was as uncertain as the weather. The boy's strength ebbed as quickly as it had bloomed, and once again the household was wrapped in mourning. Another small grave was dug, another wooden cross hammered into place. The neighbors spoke more loudly this time. Some said it was a curse, others that the family's line carried some unseen weakness. A few whispered more ominous theories. But the mother carried her grief silently, the weight of it pressing her shoulders down, her eyes hollowing with loss. And then, impossibly, a third time came. The mother conceived again, and the midwife, older now and carrying her own questions, came once more to attend. The pains of labor returned, as they always do, and when the child emerged, wet and gasping, the midwife gasped too. For the face she saw was not merely similar, nor merely familial. It was the same face she had delivered twice before. The mother looked down at the child, her hands trembling as she reached to cradle him. She knew, without doubt, without hesitation, that this was the same boy. The same eyes, the same mouth, the same fragile form. For the third time, she was holding the same child. Whispers in the town became louder, spreading like wildfire through parlor rooms and along fences. People came to see for themselves, under the guise of offering help or kindness. Some nodded gravely and muttered that the mother had been touched by some divine hand. Others insisted it was something darker. The third boy lived, and as he did, the tension around the family grew. Every visitor peered too long at the child. Every neighbor carried away more questions than answers. The father, stoic but unsettled, avoided conversation about it, throwing himself deeper into his work. The midwife, for her part, never spoke of it beyond the walls of her home, though she wrote privately of the events in her diary, her entries laced with both fear and awe. The mother, though surrounded by voices and opinions, was ultimately alone in her understanding. She knew this child, she knew him as she had known the two before, and she knew, though she could not say why or how, that he had come back to her. The boy grew, and with him, the unease that had taken root in the community deepened. Infants were meant to change with time, to shed their earliest likeness as their faces filled out, their bones shifted, and their personalities asserted themselves. Yet in this child, the sameness remained. He carried the very image of the first and the second. As the weeks passed, his expressions were eerily familiar, as though his face bore not only resemblance but memory. The mother would sometimes catch herself staring at him in silence, her heart torn between wonder and dread. She whispered lullabies in the quiet hours, but her voice faltered when she remembered that she had sung the same songs to the others. At times she pressed her lips to his forehead, as though the contact might anchor him to this world. She dared not ask aloud the question that haunted her. How many times could she hold the same child only to lose him again? The townsfolk were less cautious with their words. They gathered in shop fronts, under eaves, and by the church steps, speculating freely. The minister urged restraint, cautioning that mysteries belonged to God alone, but even his words carried the tremor of doubt. Others spoke of folk tales, of children born under strange stars, of spirits that returned until some unknown debt was paid. The most superstitious whispered that the boy might not be a child at all, but a revenant, a soul caught between this world and the next. The midwife, drawn once more into the matter by duty and by her own troubled conscience, found herself unable to keep the events from replaying in her mind. She remembered the weight of each boy, the fragile sounds they had made, the stillness of their small bodies when life had left them. She remembered, too, the shock of recognition each time. In her journal she wrote in a careful hand, "The third is as the first and the second, without deviation. There can be no denying it now. The mother believes it, the father fears it, and the town is convinced of it. Yet how such a thing is possible, I cannot say. For the mother, life narrowed to the boy's survival. She measured each day by the strength of his cry, the color in his cheeks, the firmness of his grasp. She would not let him slip from her arms without a fight. Yet, beneath her vigilance, a strange sense began to take root. When she rocked him to sleep, she felt as though she were holding a child she already knew, as if the nights had been repeated endlessly, and she was simply reenacting what had already happened. At times she even murmured the boy's name before realizing she had called him by the names of his brothers. Her husband, burdened by grief and suspicion, spoke less and less. His silences grew longer, his gaze heavier. He could not shake the feeling that his home was no longer his own, that some other force had claimed it. The third boy's presence unnerved him. He loved his son, but fear gnawed at his love. He began to spend longer hours away, hiding his unease in the rhythm of work. Yet despite the murmurs and the shadows that lingered over the household, the boy endured. Unlike the first two, he grew stronger as the months passed. He learned to sit upright, to babble in soft tones, to laugh with a sound that made the mother's heart ache. His survival seemed, at first, to be an answer to prayer, and hope began to stir again in the mother's chest. Perhaps this time would be different. Perhaps he had returned in order to stay. But hope never walked alone in that town. It was always followed by suspicion. Some neighbors refused to let their children play near the house. Others crossed themselves when they passed the mother in the street. A few whispered crueler things, suggesting that such events could not occur without the mother's own hand in it. Rumors of sorcery, curses, or hidden sin clung to her name. The minister visited more frequently. His sermons increasingly pointed toward themes of repentance, redemption, and the mysteries of God's will. He urged the mother and father to pray fervently, to trust in divine purpose, to find solace in faith. The mother listened, but his words were a poor balm for the weight of her truth. Faith could not explain why the same child had been placed in her arms 3 times. One evening, as the boy slept soundly in his cradle, the mother sat in the dim light of a kerosene lamp, her hands folded but her thoughts restless. She wondered if she had been given a burden or a gift, if she was chosen or cursed. She wondered, too, if the boy himself knew, if in his small mind and fragile heart he carried the memory of lives already lived. Outside, the wind stirred the dust across the darkened street, carrying with it the sound of distant voices. The town, restless and unsettled, kept watch as the boy grew, and the mother braced herself for what lay ahead. For she knew, as surely as she knew her own heartbeat, that this story was far from finished. As the boy entered his 2nd year, The weight of his existence pressed more heavily on the family and the town alike. Children, in those days, were rarely strangers to illness or misfortune, but this child bore more than the usual burden. He carried with him the unshakable memory of his likeness. Even as his small body learned to walk, to stumble across the wooden floorboards with laughter echoing behind him, the mother could not shake the feeling that every step was a repetition, a pattern she had seen before. She remembered the first boy, who had tried to take his first steps but never managed to steady himself before illness claimed him. She remembered the second, who had toddled just long enough to giggle at the sound of his father's boots, only to fade soon after. And now the third, the same smile, the same tilt of the head, the same sound in his laughter. It was as though time itself had rewound, not once but twice, to give her the same fleeting moments again. The midwife, too, continued to watch closely. She visited under the guise of offering help or advice, but in truth she sought answers. She would kneel near the boy, watching how his small hands reached for her apron strings, how his eyes, clear and bright, fixed on her face. She wrote at length in her journal, "The third grows stronger, more resilient than the first two. Yet his likeness remains so perfect that it unsettles me beyond measure. He is not merely a brother to the others. He is their continuation." The townsfolk no longer spoke of the matter in hushed tones. By now, it had become a story carried far beyond the fences and paddocks. Visitors from neighboring towns arrived under the pretense of errands, but lingered long enough to glimpse the boy. Some crossed themselves, others shook their heads in disbelief. The tale of the woman who had given birth to the same child 3 times spread like a fire, and with it came both fascination and fear. The minister redoubled his efforts, his sermons swelling with urgency. He spoke of trials, of Job's suffering, of mysteries that tested faith. But though he clothed his words in Scripture, he too was unsettled. In private, he confided to his wife that he had no Scripture to match what he saw. "If this child is a blessing," he whispered one evening, "why does it stir such dread in my heart?" For the mother, love remained her only compass. She dressed her son in the small clothes she had saved from before, her fingers trembling each time she unfolded them. She sang the same songs, though her voice cracked with memory. She held him in the night, when his breathing was steady against her chest, and prayed wordlessly for his life to continue. Yet she could not silence the thought that he had come back with a purpose she did not yet understand. The father grew more distant. Though he worked tirelessly, his absences lengthened, and when he returned, his silences weighed more heavily than his presence. At times he looked at the boy with something darker than fear, something closer to suspicion. It was not that he doubted his wife's virtue, nor the boy's place as his son, but in his heart he could not reconcile what his eyes saw with what the world was meant to be. The boy was his son, yet not his son. He was living, yet he had lived before. It was a paradox the father could not endure. In the wider town, whispers turned to speculation. Was the boy marked for greatness, or for ruin? Was the mother chosen, or cursed? Farmers muttered of bad seasons and blamed it on the strange child in their midst. Women, fearful yet curious, came to the house bearing gifts or food, only to leave unsettled. And still the boy grew, oblivious to the storm his existence stirred. There came one night, deep in winter, when the mother woke to find the boy staring at her in the darkness. His small face was illuminated by the faint glow of the dying fire, his eyes wide and strangely solemn. He did not cry, nor laugh, nor reach for her. He only looked, as though searching her face for something he already knew. She pulled him close, her heart pounding, and whispered to him, "Stay with me this time." The boy pressed his head against her chest and closed his eyes, as though he understood. From that night onward, the mother felt a change. It was subtle, difficult to name, but it threaded itself through every moment with him. His laughter was the same, his steps the same, but there was a steadiness to him that the others had not carried. He seemed older than his years, though his body was small and fragile. Sometimes, when she looked into his eyes, she felt as though she were looking into the eyes of all three at once, the first, the second, and now the third. The mystery of his survival grew more pressing. The midwife noted it in her journal, the minister puzzled over it in prayer, and the town gossiped endlessly. But none could answer the question that lay beneath it all. Why had this boy returned again and again, only to survive now when before he had not? The mother, though she feared the question, also clung to hope. Perhaps this time was the true time. Perhaps he had been sent back until he could endure. Perhaps she had been chosen to bear him not once, but 3 times, so that he might finally live. But the past clung to her heart like a shadow. Every cough, every fever, every stumble sent waves of terror through her. She could not look at her son without remembering the small graves, the wooden crosses, the silence that followed each loss. She loved him all the more fiercely because she knew, more than any mother should, how fragile he was. And as the boy grew stronger, so too did the unease around him. The town's fascination was sharpening into something else, something watchful, suspicious, and restless. It was no longer enough to whisper and speculate. They wanted answers. And answers, in that time and place, often came at a cost. By the time the boy turned 3, the strangeness of his existence had become part of the town's fabric. It was spoken of in kitchens, muttered over fences, debated on Sunday mornings before and after the minister's sermons. Some still pitied the mother, believing her burden too great for any woman to carry. Others grew sharper in their judgments, convinced that such things could not happen without sin, deceit, or some hidden pact with forces better left unnamed. The boy himself, unaware of the shadow he cast, played as any child would. He ran barefoot across the dry earth, his laughter ringing clear in the air. He climbed into his mother's lap with a trust that knew no fear. To him, there was only the world before him, the dust, the light, the smell of kerosene and bread. But to those who watched, there was more. When he laughed, people swore they had heard that same laugh before, not once, but twice. When he tumbled, when he cried, when he reached out with his small hands, every gesture echoed the boys who had come before him. It was as though the past clung to his body like a second skin. The midwife, now older and frilier, continued to visit. Her curiosity had hardened into something like obsession. She questioned the mother gently. Had the boy ever spoken of things he could not know? Had he ever recognized objects from before, places he could not have seen? The mother admitted nothing beyond her own feelings, that she often believed she was holding the same child. Yet the midwife could not let go of her wonder. In her diary she wrote, "I do not know whether he is the same soul or the same body, but I know he is the same boy. Science will not explain this, nor will faith satisfy it. It is something beyond both." The father, meanwhile, grew more distant still. His work consumed him, his hands calloused and his body bent with effort. Yet when he came home, he could not shake the feeling that his house was no longer his own. Sometimes he stood in the doorway of the child's room, watching the boy sleep, torn between love and dread. He loved his son, yes, but he also feared him, feared what he represented, feared the questions that could not be answered. The townsfolk's unease began to spill over into action. Some mothers pulled their children away when the boy approached. Others warned the mother to keep him close, to keep him from wandering. A few muttered openly about curses, about unnatural things. The minister's sermons grew more direct, urging the congregation to resist fear, to trust in God's plan, but his words did little to still the restless minds of his flock. One evening, the mother brought the boy to church, as she always did. The air inside was heavy with expectation. As hymns rose, she held him in her lap, his small voice babbling happily, unaware of the weight pressing down on the pews around him. When the service ended, people lingered longer than usual. They crowded near, some with questions, others with stares. One woman leaned too close and whispered, "How many times will he come back?" The mother turned away, clutching the boy tightly. It was then that she realized the truth she had not wanted to see. The town's fascination was no longer harmless. Their curiosity had teeth. What had once been whispers was becoming something sharper, something dangerous. At home, she pressed her lips against her son's hair and prayed. She prayed for his life, for his safety, for the strength to shield him. Yet even as she prayed, she felt the weight of inevitability. The boy's existence was too strange to be ignored forever. Winter came, harsh and unyielding. The boy grew thin in the cold, though his spirit remained bright. The mother wrapped him in blankets, held him close to the fire, and told him stories to keep the night at bay. Sometimes he looked at her with an expression that unsettled her, not because it was strange, but because it was too familiar. It was the look of a child who had lived before. One night, as snow gathered faintly along the ground, a rare gift in that part of Australia, the boy stirred in his sleep. He whispered words she could not understand, soft and broken, like fragments of a dream. She leaned close, straining to hear, and though she could not catch the whole of it, she thought she heard a name. Not his name now, but the name she had given the first boy. Her breath caught. She pressed her hand against her mouth, afraid to wake him, afraid to hear more. In her heart, she knew she had not misheard. The next morning, she told no one, not the father, not the midwife, not even the minister. It was her secret, the proof of what she had always felt. This was not only the same body, not only the same face. This was the same child, carrying memory like a shadow. But secrets rarely remain hidden long, especially in small towns. And soon, events would force her secret into the open, whether she willed it or not. The town grew restless with winter's bite. Short days left long evenings for speculation, and in the glow of oil lamps, neighbors whispered of the child more than ever. Rumors took shape, each more elaborate than the last. Some said the boy was marked by God, returned 3 times to fulfill some sacred purpose. Others insisted he was an omen, a warning that misfortune would follow until he was gone for good. The mother bore the weight of these whispers in silence. She kept the boy close, seldom letting him wander beyond the yard. Where once she might have joined her neighbors in small talk by the well or market, now she avoided their eyes. Every glance seemed heavy with judgment, every kindness laced with suspicion. The boy, oblivious, thrived in his small world. His speech came slowly at first, but when it came, it carried a clarity that startled those who heard him. He spoke in full sentences sooner than expected, his words deliberate, as though chosen with care. The midwife noted it with awe. He speaks not as a child of his years, but as though he has carried language longer than his body suggests. The father found himself caught between pride and unease. Hearing his son's small voice stirred love in him, yet at times he swore the boy's tone carried something older, something that did not belong to a toddler. Once, when the boy answered a question before it was asked, the father left the room without a word, his hands trembling at his sides. Spring returned, bringing warmth to the land, but with it came a shift in the town's mood. Curiosity hardened into intrusion. Strangers began arriving, travelers from other towns, and even men who claimed to be scholars. They came asking to see the child, to sit with him, to study him as though he were some rare creature. Some offered payment, others simply lingered, unwilling to leave until they had caught sight of him. The mother refused them all. She barred her door, her patience thinning with each knock. "He is my son," she said firmly to one persistent visitor. "Not a spectacle." Yet the more she resisted, the more determined they became. The minister, too, could not resist the growing pressure. He urged her gently at first. Perhaps letting others see him will bring clarity. Perhaps God has placed this child here for a reason greater than we can yet see. But she shook her head. She would not surrender her son to their prying eyes. One evening, as the sun sank low and shadows stretched across the house, the boy sat on the floor with a wooden block in his hand. He turned it slowly, studying it, then spoke with an odd calm. "I had this before." The mother's breath caught. "What do you mean?" she whispered. He looked at her, his eyes solemn. "It was mine. Before." Her hands shook. She gathered him into her arms, pressing her cheek against his hair, though fear made her heart race. He said nothing more, returning to his play as though the words had been nothing. But for her, they were everything. They confirmed what she had felt in her bones. He remembered. The days that followed brought more moments like it. Small fragments, stray remarks that hinted at memory. He would recognize places he had never been, ask for toys long buried, speak of events that had no place in his short life. Each time, the mother grew colder with fear, yet fiercer in her resolve to protect him. But protection was slipping beyond her grasp. Word of his strange utterances spread. Whether through careless slip or quiet observation, the neighbors began to suspect more than resemblance. They began to whisper not only that he was the same child in body, but in soul. The midwife, torn between loyalty and curiosity, struggled in silence. Her journal grew longer, filled with sketches of the boy's face, comparisons to his brothers, and notes of every peculiar word he spoke. She wrote, "If I could speak of this beyond these pages, it would be called madness. Yet I cannot deny what my eyes see and my ears hear. He remembers." The father, increasingly uneasy, began to drink more heavily. He sat long into the night, staring into the fire, muttering of curses and ill omens. Sometimes he paced the house, restless and angry, torn between love for his wife and son and a growing belief that something unnatural had taken root under his roof. The mother, though worn thin by grief, fear, and exhaustion, clung to her son with a desperation that frightened even herself. She whispered to him at night, "Stay, please, stay with me." Her arms were his refuge, her prayers his shield, but she could feel the town pressing closer, the walls tightening around them. And so the stage was set for what was to come. For when a mystery grows too large, when whispers grow too loud, they demand resolution. And the town, restless and afraid, was no longer willing to let the matter rest. By the time the boy turned 4, the weight of his presence had divided the town. There were those who insisted he was a blessing, a miracle sent to their midst. They claimed his survival proved that God's hand was upon him. Others, more suspicious, whispered that he was a warning, a dark sign wrapped in the innocent skin of a child. Between these two factions, gossip grew louder than prayer, and suspicion sharper than kindness. The mother lived in the middle of this storm, clinging to her son as though the strength of her arms could shield him from the world. She rarely ventured out anymore, choosing instead to keep to her small home. Her shutters stayed closed more often than not, and when she did appear at market, she carried herself with her chin lifted, daring anyone to speak. But they did not need to speak to her directly. Their voices found her anyway, carried on the breeze, echoing in the stillness of the night. The boy, unaware of the tension, grew more curious, more aware of his world. His speech deepened, his memory sharpened, and more often now he startled his mother with words that no child his age should have known. One morning, while she was sweeping the floor, he sat nearby with a chipped cup in his small hands. He stared at it for a long while before saying, softly, "I dropped this before." She froze, the broom bristling against the floorboards. "What do you mean?" He looked at her with solemn eyes. "I dropped it, and it broke. But you fixed it." Her breath left her in a rush. That had happened years ago, with the first boy. The memory was etched into her heart, the cup falling, the sharp break, her hurried mending with glue. No one else could have remembered. She knelt beside him, clutching his shoulders, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Do you remember me?" The boy nodded simply, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "You always hold me when I am cold." Her tears spilled freely. She pulled him against her chest, her body trembling with both love and terror. For in that moment she knew with certainty what she had only feared before. He carried the memories of the others. He was not just their likeness, he was them. The midwife, when told, turned pale. Her hands trembled as she clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Do not speak of this," she urged. "Do not let the town hear it. They will not see what you see. They will make it into something wicked." But the mother could tell from her eyes that she, too, believed. Yet secrecy was fragile in a place where gossip grew like weeds. Before long, fragments of the boy's words reached the ears of others. A neighbor swore she had heard him speak of places he had never seen, another that he called his mother by the wrong name. The story spread, twisted with each telling, until the town buzzed with it. The minister, cornered by his congregation, could no longer stay silent. From the pulpit he preached with fire, warning of false wonders, of deceptions clothed in innocence. He urged his flock to be vigilant, to test every spirit, to guard themselves from darkness. His words hung heavy in the air, and though he never named the boy, everyone knew who he meant. The father, hearing whispers even at his work, grew bitter. He returned home one evening with harsh words on his tongue. "They speak of him as though he were a curse," he told his wife. "And what am I to say? What am I to tell them, when even in this house I do not know the truth?" His voice cracked with frustration. "I bury my sons, and yet they come back to me. Tell me how I am to live with that." The mother, fierce in her love, stood her ground. "He is our son. He has always been our son. I will not let them take him from me." But her defiance did not ease the strain. The father drank deeper from the bottle, his silences longer, his gaze darker. He loved his son, yes, but that love had become tangled with dread. The boy, sensing more than he understood, began to withdraw. His laughter came less often, replaced by long silences as he watched the adults around him. Sometimes he asked questions that chilled his mother to the bone. "Why do they look at me like that? Why don't they remember me too?" Her only answer was to gather him close and whisper, "Because only I was meant to remember." Outside, the tension in the town reached its peak. Groups lingered at corners, arguments flared at market stalls. Some demanded the minister confront the family directly, others called for patience. But all agreed on one thing: the boy was no ordinary child, and something had to be done. The mother, hearing the unrest grow louder, barred her door and held her son through the night. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her blood, that the storm was coming, and when it arrived, it would not leave her house untouched. The storm broke not with thunder, but with footsteps. One evening, as the sun slipped low and shadows stretched across the yard, the sound of boots on the dirt path grew louder than the cicadas. The mother, rocking her son near the hearth, stiffened at the knock that followed, firm, deliberate, and inescapable. When she opened the door, she found the minister standing there, his hat in his hands, his expression somber. Behind him lingered two deacons, their faces set with unease. The mother's arms tightened around the boy instinctively. "We have come to speak," the minister said, his voice soft but edged with authority. "There are matters that cannot be ignored." She hesitated, then stepped aside. The men entered, their eyes darting toward the child, who clung to his mother's dress but met their stares with a gaze too steady for his years. The minister cleared his throat. "There are concerns in the town. People whisper. They say the boy is not like others. They say he remembers things he cannot know." He paused, searching her face. "I do not come to accuse, only to understand." The mother's voice trembled with both fear and defiance. "He is my son. He is flesh and blood. Whatever he knows, whatever he is mine." The minister nodded slowly. "And yet, you must see how it unsettles others. You must see the danger in their fear." His gaze softened, but his words carried weight. Fear left unchecked can turn cruel. The boy, listening quietly, suddenly spoke. His small voice was clear, unshaken. "You prayed for rain last summer, in your garden, but you didn't tell anyone." The room fell silent. The minister's eyes widened, and color drained from his face. It was true, a private prayer he had whispered alone, with no ear to hear. He stumbled back a step, his lips parting without words. The deacons exchanged glances, unease thick in the air. The mother pulled the boy close, her heart pounding. "Do you see?" she whispered fiercely. He is no curse. He is a gift. But the minister could not answer. His faith, so often steady, faltered before the weight of what he had just heard. He left soon after, his steps hurried, his words unfinished. The deacons followed, their silence heavier than accusation. That night, the town hummed with new whispers. By morning, everyone knew the story. The boy who spoke of secret prayers. Some called it proof of divinity, others proof of sorcery. The divide in the town grew wider, the air thick with suspicion. The father returned late that evening, his face drawn. "They will not leave us be," he muttered, sinking into a chair. "I hear them at the tavern, at the fields. Some say he should be taken to a doctor in the city, others that he should be locked away. And some—" His voice trailed off. The mother pressed him. "Some what?" He looked up, his eyes bleak. "Some say he should never have been allowed to live at all." Her breath caught. She clutched her son tighter, her body trembling with rage and terror. "Over my dead body," she hissed. The boy, sensing her fear, laid his small hand against her cheek. "Don't cry, Mama. I'll stay this time." The words pierced her like a blade. She kissed his hand, holding it against her face, unable to speak. In the weeks that followed, the family lived under constant watch. Strangers lingered near their gate. Children pointed from a distance. Men spoke in low voices whenever the father passed. The midwife visited often, her concern growing deeper with each day. "You must be careful," she warned. "When fear grips a town, it blinds them. It makes them capable of things they would never do otherwise." The mother knew she was right. She began to hide the boy away when visitors came, drawing the curtains tighter, speaking less to her neighbors. But secrecy only fueled the rumors. One night, as the wind rattled the windows, she awoke to the sound of voices outside. Low, harsh, urgent. She crept to the window and peered through the narrow crack in the curtain. Figures stood at the edge of the yard, their faces shadowed, their gestures sharp. She could not hear their words, but she felt the danger in them. She turned back to her son, sleeping peacefully, his face soft in the lamplight. Kneeling beside him, she whispered, "I will protect you, no matter what it takes." But even as she said it, a chill ran through her, for the storm gathering outside was larger than her arms could shield, and soon it would break upon them with a force she could not stop. The following days were heavy with silence, the kind of silence that comes before a reckoning. The mother kept the boy indoors, shuttering the windows, tending to him with a fierce tenderness that bordered on desperation. She could feel the town pressing in, even when no one knocked on her door. It was in the stillness of the street, in the way footsteps slowed as they passed, in the uneasy hush when her name was spoken. The father grew restless under the weight of it. He drank more, spoke less, and when he did speak, his words were sharp. "We cannot go on like this," he muttered one evening, his hands trembling as he filled a glass. "They will not leave us alone. You cannot fight a whole town." The mother, cradling the boy in her lap, answered firmly, "Then let them come. He is mine. I will not give him up." But her words could not dispel the dread that clung to him. He left the house that night and did not return until morning, his eyes bloodshot, his jaw set. He carried with him the smell of smoke and ale, and though he said nothing, the mother knew he had been among the men who spoke in low voices of her child. The midwife, faithful in her concern, came with a warning. They are meeting, some of them, not openly, but in barns, in back rooms. They speak of the boy as though he were not flesh and blood. They say he is something else, something that should not be here. Her voice trembled. You must be ready. The mother's heart clenched, but she nodded. That night she packed a small bundle in secret, clothes for the boy, a loaf of bread, a flask of water. She hid it beneath the bed. If they came for him, she would run. But the boy, ever watchful, seemed to sense her fear. He sat quietly at her side, his eyes wide and knowing. "You're scared, Mama," he said softly. She tried to smile. "No, love. I'm just tired." But he shook his head. "You think they'll take me?" Her hands froze. She looked at him, her throat tight. "No one will take you. I won't let them." He leaned into her, resting his head against her chest. "It's all right. I've been gone before. I'll come back if I have to." The words shattered her. She clutched him fiercely, sobbing into his hair. "No," she whispered. "Not again. Not ever again." In the days that followed, tension thickened. The minister, though torn, could no longer temper his flock. His sermons grew heavier, urging vigilance, warning of deception. He stopped short of naming the boy, but the congregation needed no name. Their eyes were already turned toward the house with the shuttered windows. One evening, the mother caught sight of children throwing stones at her gate, their laughter sharp and cruel. She rushed out, shouting, her voice trembling with fury. The children scattered, but not before one yelled back, "He doesn't belong here." The words struck her harder than any stone. The boy, watching from the doorway, whispered, "They know." Her heart twisted. "It doesn't matter what they know. You belong with me." But in her bones she felt the truth. Belonging was no longer the question. Survival was. The father's silence grew heavier each night. He avoided her gaze, avoided the boys altogether. Once she woke in the dark to find him sitting by the hearth, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the child's cradle. His hand gripped the arm of the chair so tightly his knuckles whitened. When she asked what troubled him, he only muttered, "I don't know what he is." Her voice, raw with love and fury, answered, "He is ours. That is enough." But it was no longer enough for the town. One night, when the wind howled against the roof and the fire burned low, she heard it again. Voices outside, harsher now, closer. She crept to the window and saw the glow of lanterns moving through the dark, shadows shifting near the fence. The sound of men's boots pressed against the earth, their words indistinct but urgent. She backed away, her breath shallow, and hurried to the boy's room. He stirred as she lifted him, blinking in the lamplight. "Is it time?" he asked, his small voice calm, almost expectant. Tears blurred her sight. "No, love. Not this time. Not ever." She pulled the bundle from beneath the bed, clutching it with one arm while holding him in the other. The voices grew louder outside, the lantern light spilling closer. The boy rested his head on her shoulder, unafraid, as though he had been through it all before. The mother, her heart pounding, pressed her lips to his hair and whispered, "We run." And with that, she pushed open the back door into the night. The night air was sharp against her skin, colder than it should have been for the season. The mother clutched the boy close, his small arms wrapping instinctively around her neck, his breath warm against her cheek. The bundle thumped against her hip as she slipped into the darkness behind the house. Lantern light flickered at the front, voices calling low and urgent. She could hear the crunch of boots on the gravel path, the creak of the gate. They were coming closer. She moved quickly but silently, her bare feet finding the hardened earth as she headed toward the open field beyond the yard. The boy whispered in her ear, "They won't let us go." "Hush," she breathed, pressing her cheek to his. "Hold on to me." The field stretched wide, silvered by the thin glow of the moon. The tall grass whispered as she pushed through, her heart hammering, every step an act of defiance. Behind her, the lanterns bobbed and wavered, the voices rising louder, angrier. She could hear her husband's voice among them, though faint, not shouting, but not stopping them either. Her throat tightened. She kept running. The boy, heavy in her arms, shifted slightly. "It's all right, Mama," he murmured, too calm for a child fleeing into the night. "I told you. I'll stay this time." Tears burned her eyes. She pressed her lips to his temple and whispered fiercely, "I won't lose you again." The midwife had warned her of this. She had seen the fear hardening in the town's eyes. And now that fear had gathered into action, a force too large to resist from within her walls, her only choice was flight. She stumbled once, her foot catching on a root, but she steadied herself before she fell. The boy did not cry out, only clung tighter. Behind her, the voices grew clearer. "There! She's running!" The command tore through the night, followed by the pounding of boots. Lantern light flared brighter, closing the distance. The mother pushed harder, her breath ragged, her legs burning. She aimed for the line of trees at the far edge of the field, their dark silhouettes promising cover. If she could reach them, perhaps she could hide until dawn. But the boy lifted his head from her shoulder, his voice soft and certain. "You don't have to run forever. They'll stop when they see." She looked at him, his face pale in the moonlight, his eyes wide and strange, eyes that seemed older than his years, older even than her grief. "See what?" she whispered. But he did not answer. The shouts behind her grew louder. A stone struck the ground near her feet. She gasped and ran harder, the trees drawing nearer with every step. Her lungs burned, her arms ached, but she would not stop. Not while her son was in her arms. At last, she reached the first of the trees, the shadows swallowing her as she pushed into the thicket. Branches tore at her clothes, scratched her skin, but she pressed on, deeper and deeper, until the lights behind her were swallowed by the dark. She collapsed at the base of an old gum tree, clutching the boy tightly, her chest heaving. For a long moment, there was only the sound of her breath, the pounding of her heart, the rustle of leaves in the wind. The boy reached up and touched her face, his fingers gentle. "You don't have to be afraid," he whispered. "You've always found me. Every time." Her tears fell onto his small hand. "And I will always find you," she swore. Somewhere beyond the trees, the men shouted, their lanterns casting wild beams through the undergrowth. But the forest was wide, and the night deep. For now, she and her son were hidden. The mother rocked him in her arms, her body trembling with exhaustion, her mind whirling with fear and determination. She knew this was not the end. The town would not relent so easily. The storm would follow them, wherever they went. But for this moment, in the hush of the trees, with her son's heartbeat steady against her chest, she allowed herself to breathe. The boy, half asleep now, murmured one last thing before drifting into slumber. "It's not over yet, but you'll see. You'll see why I came back." His words lingered in the dark, wrapping around her like both a comfort and a warning. The forest became their refuge, but also their trial. The mother moved with caution, guiding the boy through dense thickets and winding paths, keeping low when she heard the distant sweep of lanterns or the crack of branches under pursuing feet. Each hour of the night stretched into eternity, the weight of fear pressing against her ribs like a stone. By dawn, the shouts had faded. The men, weary or unwilling to chase further into the dark, had retreated. Yet the mother knew this was not victory. It was only a pause, a breath drawn before the next wave. The town would not forget, and the men who had come with lanterns would not stop until their doubts were silenced one way or another. She found a hollow near a fallen tree, a pocket of earth hidden from easy view, and there she rested. The boy curled against her, eyes half closed but watchful. She gave him bread from the bundle, though her own stomach twisted with hunger she did not satisfy. When the sun climbed higher, she dared to speak. "We cannot stay here long. We must find a place where they cannot reach us." The boy chewed quietly, then looked at her with that unsettling, steady gaze. "They'll always reach us, no matter where we go." Her chest tightened. "Why do you say such things? Why can't you just be a child?" He tilted his head, thoughtful. "Because I'm not just a child." Her throat burned. She pressed her palm to his hair, smoothing it back as though to ground him, to anchor him in flesh and blood. "You are mine," she whispered. "Whatever you are mine." But his words echoed inside her, chilling her even as her arms warmed him. That night, the forest shifted around them. Owls called in the distance, and a breeze carried with it the faintest sound of hymns, voices drifting faintly from the town beyond. The mother held her son tighter, listening. The songs of faith, once familiar, now rang like warnings. By the third day in the forest, hunger gnawed at them both. The bread was gone, the water nearly finished. The boy grew weaker, though he did not complain. He only leaned into her, his small frame lighter in her arms than it had been. The mother realized then that they could not survive in hiding forever. She would have to choose, return and face the town, or flee further, beyond the hills, into places where no one knew their names. But each choice carried danger. As she weighed her heart against her fear, the boy stirred and whispered, "You'll see soon." She looked down at him, startled. "See what?" He met her eyes with a depth that froze her breath. "Why I keep coming back." The forest stilled around them, as though holding its breath. The mother felt the weight of his words settle over her, heavy and inevitable. Whatever he was, whatever mystery lived inside him, it was not finished yet. The next morning, they heard footsteps again. Not many this time, only one set, slow and deliberate, approaching through the undergrowth. The mother's heart leapt into her throat. She pulled the boy close, ready to flee. But when the figure emerged from the trees, it was not one of the men with lanterns. It was the midwife. Her shawl hung loose about her shoulders, her eyes weary, but her steps were steady. She raised her hands in peace. "Child," she called softly to the mother, "I am alone. I came to find you." The mother clutched her son tighter, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Why? To bring us back to them?" The midwife shook her head. "No, to warn you. They will not stop. They mean to take the boy. Some for fear, some for zeal. They think it is God's will. You must decide now whether to keep running, or whether to stand." The boy stirred, his voice calm, unwavering. "Mama, it's time." The mother looked down at him, her heart pounding. His eyes, deep and ancient, locked with hers. She felt the truth in them, a truth she had both longed for and dreaded. The forest waited, the air heavy with choice. Would she keep fleeing, clinging to her son with desperate arms? Or would she turn back, face the storm head-on, and finally uncover the reason he had returned to her again and again? The boy's hand slid into hers. Small, warm, steady. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "we will be together." And with those words, the story, her story, his story, their story, pressed forward into the unknown, the weight of love and mystery carrying them toward what could no longer be delayed. And so the echoes of 1935 fade into silence. But some stories never truly end. If you felt the chill in this one, subscribe to Eternal Obsidian and step deeper into the shadows with me.